In this exercise, we're going to work on stitches per inch. In the industry, you'll see it abbreviated as SPI. What this is the amount of stitches your machine makes within 1 inch. Smaller stitches are used for finer fabrics, while longer stitches are used for thicker fabrics. This is the pattern we'll be using. It's called Stitching Practice, Stitches per Inch. And we're going to cut 2 of these. So I'm going to lay my fabric out. And we're actually going to double this over, and we're going to stretch it. Looks like it's a little bit off grain, so we're just going to stretch it here as we've done in the previous textiles video to get everything back on grain. Now I'm going to fold this over, but I'm only going to fold this over for the width that I need for the pattern. And I'm going to make sure that I'm lining my grain line up with the straight grain. Once I feel that it looks good, I'll weight it, and then I'm going to trace around. Now, before I cut this out, I'm actually going to pin it in a few places on the inside of where my pencil mark is. This will hold the 2 layers of the fabric together while I cut. Alright, so this is our pattern piece. We're going to leave it doubled because it's easier for the machine to sew with the thickness. So I'll carefully kind of remove these pins and kind of repin them in the direction that I'm actually going to be sewing, which is we're going to mark straight lines on this piece. So you can use your pencil. I prefer to use an erasable pen so that when I press this, it will go away. If you use pencil, it will not disappear when you press this. So remember the dial that we have on our machine that goes from 0 to 5. On some machines, it goes 0 to 4. These are the areas that actually increase or decrease your stitch length. So because mine goes from 1 to 5, I'm actually going to make 5 lines on here, and I'm going to stitch individual lines on each of those numbers. So this piece is actually 6 inches wide, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to draw 5 individual lines on this piece. And to keep this uniform, I'm going to mark up 1 inch from each of the ends so that all my stitching lines will be uniform. So again, what I've done is, since I'm going to be stitching 5 lines, I'm going to stitch a number 1, I'll stitch a number 2, at number 3, at number 4, and number 5, and then I will count the stitches. So now that I've got the lines marked, I'm actually going to mark the numbers that I'm going to stitch at. So I'm going to put the stitch dial at 1, at 2, at 3, at 4, and 5, and I will stitch these lines at those numbers on the dial. So I'm just going to label this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll turn that around. You can see I have 1 to 5 here. Now, I'm actually probably going to come back before I press and actually write these numbers in permanent marker so that when I have them in my notebook, I'll be able to refer back to how many stitches per inch is at 1, at 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. So now let's go over to the machine. Okay, I'm ready to work on my SPI, that's stitches per inch, and as previously mentioned, I have all of my lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to just stitch straight lines, but I'm going to be turning my stitch dial to each of these numbers when I get done, because I want to know how many stitches per inch each of those numbers are. So I have my line marked here. I'm going to start here at this point, and then I will sew all the way down, and I will end here. And just for practice, I'm going to go ahead and backstitch at the beginning and the end. So I've got my stitch dial here at 1. So that's what I'm going to start with. So lift your presser foot, put the fabric in, and then you're going to put the needle down at that point. And then I'm going to go ahead and backstitch when I start. So sew a little bit and then backstitch. And then now I'm going to just stitch my line. Now 1 is a very small stitch, so that's why it's taking a little bit of a while to get through the machine. So you're coming up here. I'm going to stop here just for a second just to remind you, because we're going to backstitch at this point. So the stitches are very small, so even though it seems like I'm sewing really fast, it just takes a little bit to get to the machine. So I'm going to continue to sew, and I'm going to get ready to backstitch the hair at this point. And backstitch. Bring that needle all the way up, and then I can pull the fabric out. And I'm going to clip these threads at the beginning and the end. And I'm going to repeat that process for this next stitch line, but I'm going to turn my dial to the 2. So repeat that process, needle down, backstitch, and then sew. Get ready to backstitch. Needle all the way up, and then you can remove. And I'm just kind of clipping as I go, so I don't have to kind of do this at the end. So this is pretty easy sewing. Remember, we're going to do our number 3 now. So I'm going to turn the dial to 3 and line up your fabric and your needle. The needle down. I'm going to backstitch again at the beginning. Sew down that line. Get ready to backstitch. Bring that needle all the way up. And I'm trimming all of my threads very nicely. If you get in the habit of doing that in the beginning, then you'll be doing it throughout your career, and you won't have to clean up a lot at the end of your garment. So I'm going to move on to the 4. So I'm going to turn my stitch length to the 4, align the needle, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning. Now, the larger you go, the faster it's going to take the fabric. So you just may need to watch how fast you're sewing and aligning the fabric along the stitch line. Get ready to backstitch. Needle up. And my last stitch row here is going to be at a 5. So I'm going to switch my dial up to the 5, align the needle to my beginning spot, press our foot down, get ready to backstitch, and then we'll sew that line. Get ready to backstitch here. These are really long stitches. Backstitch, needle all the way up, pull the fabric out. Okay, so now we have all 5 of our rows stitched. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and press it, and we're going to do that, the pressing mat, and then we're actually going to count all of these stitches. So we'll see you at the pressing mat. Okay, so here's our completed stitches per inch SPI, and I have my 5 rows of stitching all at different lengths. And remember when we first started, when I cut these out, I wrote these numbers up here at the top in erasable pen. So I want to keep those numbers because I need to remember what number I had the machine dial set at for each of these. So I should have done it in permanent marker at the beginning, but I simply forgot. So I'm going to remark my numbers, right? And the reason I wanted to do that first is because I actually want to press this. So, and by pressing, I will lose all of those line marks. I just want to press this flat. So that's important because I need to set these stitches in for my SPI exercise, because I want these stitches to be set in the fabric, because I'm going to need to actually count in between. So what I'm going to do is I have a ruler, and this is my see-through ruler, and this is 1 inch wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up somewhere probably in the middle, and I'm going to line it right on top of those lines, so that I'm going to be marking a 1 inch width that I'm going to be counting my stitches in. And I'm using a fairly fine point. It's not super fine, but if you have something finer than this, it's probably better. But I want you to be able to see the line that I'm marking. So I have my lines. I can see right through it. So I've got my thick lines on this ruler right on top of all of those lines. And I'm just going to draw a permanent line on the top and the bottom. Now I want this permanent because I don't want to lose that spacing. So now what we're going to do is between these lines between these permanent lines that I just drew, I'm going to be actually counting the stitches. And remember here, 1, it's a very tiny stitch, so you may need a magnifying glass also for number 2. I certainly need my glasses, but what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to try to set the camera a little bit closer to the fabric so you can see the stitches that I'm counting. Okay, so you can see this a little bit better. I'm using an awl to count these. So I'm going to start with the longest stitches from here to here. So here I've got 1 stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 6 stitches per inch for the number 5. And so I'm going to write 6 right next to that. So let's count the number 4, again, starting from here, going to here. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's not a whole lot of change, but it's still 1 more than number 5. So let's do our number 3. So starting from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 9 stitches for our number 3. Now this is where it gets a little bit more challenging. You may have to get closer or use a magnifying glass. I'm going to just kind of lean in a little bit to count. I'm going from here to here. And let me see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's 14 stitches for number 2. So now let's go to the number 1. This is going to be really challenging because these are so tiny that we may just have to mark them off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the camera to get really close up on this line for you so that we can actually see it as I'm counting it. Okay, so I've zoomed way up in here, and still we're having a lot of trouble seeing that. So there are a lot of little stitches here. Let's see where these little round little bobble parts, we're going to count those as stitches. And I think I can start right here by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Take a little rest. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. That's what I'm counting. I don't know if I overcounted or undercounted, but that's the number that I get. And normally we probably wouldn't be using this teeny tiny of a stitch. That's a lot of stitches per inch, but we may use somewhere in between the 14 and the 13. So I'm going to zoom out here really quick because I want to show you if I can do that. The whole thing now. And let's just move that over. Okay, so what we have here is for 5, I've got 6 stitches. For 4, it's 7. For 3, it's 9. For 2, it's 14. And for 1, it's 33. Now, I have said previously that our regular normal stitches per inch are between 12 and 14. So where are we going to set our dial? So I'm always going to set my dial at about 2.5, somewhere between 2 and 3. So 9 is less than 12. 14 is larger than 12. So I'm going to use the stitch length that's somewhere in between the 2 and the 3. And normally I'll have my machine set at about 2.5. So just keep these in mind. And this is a good tool for you to have in your notebook. So when we start talking about different thicknesses of fabrics and different types of garments, you'll know where your SPI is on your machine at all times.